15 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few running backs I will bench this week. The first guy, Devonta Freeman of the Baltimore Ravens. So Freeman last week, he didn't have a good game versus a good front four over there in Cleveland, but he's been a pretty serviceable and decent running back for the most part over the last few weeks. Week 12 versus Cleveland, 16 carries, 52 yards, a catch for 8 yards. Week 13 at Pittsburgh, a big game, 14 carries, 52 yards, 5 catches, 45 yards, and a rushing touchdown. And then last week at Cleveland, 5 catches, 8 yards, and 13 carries, 64 yards. So those 5 catches in PPR leagues bailed him out, because if he didn't have those, he wouldn't do much. And this week here, another tough matchup for Freeman versus the Green Bay Packers that give up the 10th least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. And obviously it's going to be a tougher day for Freeman, in my opinion, if Lamar Jackson's not going to start. So right here with a tough matchup, with Jackson not 100% and not a guarantee to start this week, I would steer away from Freeman if I have better options and bench him, because at max, he's only going to get 10 to 12 points, I think, this week. The next running back's Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. So Hubbard filling in for Christian McCaffrey now, who's going to be out for the season, which was announced a few weeks ago. And Hubbard, in his first start, once again back since McCaffrey went out, Week 14 versus a weak Atlanta team. 10 carries, 33 yards, and a touchdown. But right here, Week 15, I want no part of Hubbard in this one. In a very tough matchup at Buffalo that gives up the 6th least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. And right here, even if Sam Darnold's back, it's not much of an upgrade, in my opinion, for the Panthers over Cam Newton or P.J. Walker, because Sam Darnold was a turnover machine after the first 4 games of the season and taking a lot of sacks, throwing the ball all over the field and getting picked. And right here, this offense, I got no confidence in anyone over here in Carolina, besides maybe DJ Moore as a fantasy option. So this week here, Hubbard, tough matchup, not going to get that many carries in my opinion, just the way the game script is going to be. And he's a running back I would bench this week. The next running back's A.J. Dillon of the Green Bay Packers. So the Packers versus the Baltimore Ravens this week here. A.J. Dillon last week, I thought he was going to have a big ball game versus the Chicago Bears, but that wasn't the case here for Dillon. After coming off of 2 big ball games in Week 11 and 12, Week 11 in Minnesota, 11 carries, 53 yards, 6 catches, 44 yards. Week 12 versus the Rams, 20 carries, 69 yards, 5 catches, 21 yards, and a touchdown. And Week 14 versus Chicago, 15 carries, 71 yards. So right here, if he's not scoring touchdowns, he's pretty much not a running back you can rely on. And this week here, a very tough matchup at Baltimore that gives up the 5th least amount of fantasy points to running backs this season. So this Raven team's at home. They're going to try to stop the run. And let's be honest, Aaron Jones last week, he finally had the big ball game, is Jones. And he's still the number 1 running back over there in Green Bay, even though it's a 60-40 split in Jones' favor. But right here, tough matchup for Dillon. Last week, he didn't get any catches. He still had a decent workload, but right now, he's just a running back I can't trust with a tough matchup in a big playoff situation. This week, the next running back's Rashad Penny of the Seattle Seahawks. So Penny had the best game possibly of his career last week here, and he got added in 50% of fantasy leagues. He looks like he's the number 1 running back over there in Seattle, with Adrian Peterson not doing much, Alex Collins struggling over the last few weeks as a starter. And last week he got the opportunity and he took advantage of it and had a huge game, no doubt, in Week 14 in Houston. 16 carries, 137 yards, 2 touchdowns, a catch for a yard. But right here, very tough matchup at the Rams, who we saw pretty much have their way for the most part with that Arizona offense, except James Conner making a few grabs, and those 2 goal line touchdowns will really save the day for Conner, where he would have had a mediocre fantasy day. But Rashad Penny's injury prone. This Seattle offensive line isn't that good. And he might have been only a 1-week wonder last week with a huge game at a weak Houston Texan defense. So in a big spot here as a number 2 running back or a flex option, it's still a tough spot here for fantasy owners, I believe, to start Rashad Penny, unless you're in a deep league or a league where you start 4 or 5 flexes with 2 running backs or something. But this week here, I would just bench him with the tough matchup. And the 5th and final running back I will bench is James Robinson of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Robinson last week, he put in a dud performance. And after the workload and the bad performance, I know he's got a great matchup at Houston this week here. that gives up the 6th most fantasy points to running backs, but I just can't trust him with the production I've seen the last few weeks here from Robinson and the horrible offense that this Jacksonville Jaguar offense has been pretty much the whole season. Week 12 versus Atlanta, 17 carries, 86 yards, 3 catches, 29 yards, a fumble loss. Week 13 at the Rams, 8 carries, 24 yards, a catch, 11 yards, a fumble loss. And then last week, non-existent, 6 carries for 4 yards at Tennessee. So right here versus Houston, he definitely could have a good game. But going by his track record the last 3 or 4 weeks here, there's no way I could have confidence starting Robinson, especially in a playoff game as a fantasy owner. So that's a few running backs I would bench here in Week 15 of the fantasy football season.